A grandfather spends a moment by his grandson's casket before the funeral begins. Alone in the church, he hears a strange noise coming from inside the coffin. He feels a mix of confusion and fear. Suddenly, something unbelievable happens. The coffin moves. The church is quiet as Philip leans against his grandson's coffin. A frantic examination revealed no cracks. There was no obvious way for anything to have gotten inside. An animal, a squirrel perhaps, or a bird? It seemed absurd. The frantic beatings didn't match any creatures he could imagine. Rationalizations crumbled under the weight of a terrifying realization. This was no earthly sound. His grandson's body lay sealed in that casket, and that noise, that was something else. But what? He refused to let his mind wander down that path. Yet the question burned itself into his consciousness. Philip's trembling fingers found the latch. A click, and the lid was free. Time seemed to stretch, then snap. As Philip hesitated, fear battled ferociously against the burning, terrible need to know. He had to end this nightmare, whatever horrors it might reveal. With a swift, desperate motion, Philip pushed the lid upwards. The silence that followed was deafening. His eyes slammed closed. Every muscle braced for a scream, a rush of wings, or perhaps the stench of rotting flesh. A split second passed, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, he dared to peek through his eyelids. His sudden intake of breath echoed through the stillness. Staring up at him were wide, terror-filled eyes, undeniably human, undeniably alive. The face was young female, smudged with dirt and tears. A ragged gag stifled her cries, her wrists bound. Beneath her was the body of his grandson. Confusion washed over Philip in a dizzying rush. Was this a dream? No, the tang of fear in the air was too real, and the girl's struggles were too desperate. How? Why? His mind spun. A kidnapping, some twisted thought he couldn't yet fathom. But none of those questions mattered now. A life hung in the balance. Panic spurred him into action. He fumbled with the gag. The girl's sobs erupted as soon as the cloth was removed. Her words spilled out in a desperate rush, incoherent but laced with stark terror. Philip barely registered them. His focus was singular, freeing her. Things were moving quickly, and Philip was completely focused on the unbelievable scene before him. The young woman looked terrified. Fear was clear in her wide, haunted eyes. All logical thoughts vanished. The situation was undeniably strange. There was something sinister happening here. But what could be worse than burying someone alive? "It's going to be okay," Philip whispered. The words seemed inadequate given the monstrous situation, but comfort and reassurance were what the girl needed. She whimpered, "He's coming back, please." Her words faded into a weak cough. She was clearly losing strength. Who was he? Why had he buried this girl along with his grandson? Philip's mind raced with urgency. He struggled with the knots, the rough twine cut into his skin. The girl was barely conscious now, a stark contrast to the fear in her eyes just moments ago. Before he could free her wrists, the rhythmic thud of footsteps shattered his attention. They sounded from behind the altar, and they came closer with each chilling beat. Someone was coming. Panic threatened to consume him, but he tamped it down with brutal force. He had to think. He had to hide her. But where? The pews offered little cover, and there was no time to reach an exit. Not unseen, he looked at the coffin again. It was his only chance. He muttered a silent apology to his dead grandson and gently maneuvered the girl back inside. He promised in a hoarse whisper to return for her. The lid slammed shut, muffling a panicked cry as he wrestled with the latch. Just as it clicked into place, a figure emerged from behind the altar. Philip's blood ran cold. It was Brandon, his other grandson, the estranged grandson, the hateful grandson. Not a priest, not an undertaker, but his own flesh and blood. A chilling smile twisted Brandon's familiar features. Brandon. The name echoed hollowly in Philip's mind as he stared at his grandson. He was something else now, a stranger with eyes devoid of warmth and a predatory smirk on his lips. Well, Brandon drawled. "Hello, grandfather." A wave of nausea swept over Philip. The weight of the situation slammed into him with brutal force. This wasn't a mistake. The coffin, the girl, this was all deliberate. Philip demanded to know the meaning of all this. He wouldn't play the role of the frightened old man, and he sure as heck wouldn't let Brandon see how deeply he was shaken. Brandon chuckled, but the sound lacked any trace of humor. "Why, grandfather, you'll be the star of the show soon enough. Always wanted center stage, didn't you?" The words dripped with malice, making a mockery of the gentle ribbing they had shared in better times. Now, each syllable struck Philip like a physical blow. Every past kindness, every moment of familial bond, twisted into something grotesque under Brandon's cruel gaze. Brandon strolled forward to the coffin. His movements were unhurried and predatory. "Oh, just a little surprise for our mourners. They're expecting a touching eulogy for my dear departed brother, aren't they? What a spectacle it'll be when they discover their dear old grandfather was trying to steal his ring and watch from the corpse." He gestured casually towards the coffin. Philip's gut clenched. Brandon's words didn't matter anymore. Philip's mind raced ahead. His priority was ensuring the girl's safety. The police were helpful, but he needed to turn the situation around and uncover the truth before it was too late. Philip's calm facade shattered into determined resolve. With a surge of adrenaline, he pushed Brandon away forcefully. Brandon staggered, surprise fleeting across his face before hardening into cold anger. The old man still has fight in him. How touching, Brandon scoffed, stepping back. "Don't worry, grandfather. The authorities will decide how crazy you really are." A flicker in Brandon's eyes told Philip he made a mistake by revealing his desperation rather than madness. Brandon would exploit this, painting Philip as deranged to the police. Philip couldn't risk endangering the frightened girl. He needed a quick plan. He conceded to Brandon, pretending to be defeated. Lowering his head, he feigned weakness. Brandon's suspicion eased slightly. "Of course, grandfather. Let me help you," he said, offering a fake smile. Philip shuffled forward, allowing Brandon to lead him to a nearby pew. Each step was a gamble. With a heavy sigh, he slumped onto the hard seat, clasping his hands together and pretending to tremble as he muttered prayers. From the corner of his eye, he watched Brandon's reaction. The smirk returned. Brandon thought he had Philip exactly where he wanted him. Philip asked for a glass of water. Brandon nodded suddenly, the picture of the concerned grandson. "Be right back, grandfather. Don't you move." He strode purposefully towards the back of the church, presumably to where a water pitcher might be found. Philip's heart raced in his chest. The first mourners were arriving. It was now or never. He didn't know what Brandon was capable of or how he was involved in all this. His eyes flickered to the coffin. It was a risky move, but his only chance. Taking a deep breath, he lunged towards it and threw the lid open with a loud crash. The girl jumped up in surprise. Philip reached into the coffin and pulled her out, pretending to struggle with her tied wrists. Some mourners turned, their confusion turning to alarm. Philip ignored them. He focused on Brandon, who was rushing back, furious. "What have you done?" Brandon yelled, charging towards the coffin. Philip shoved the girl towards Brandon. "You tell me, Brandon, who is this girl? What have you been doing?" His accusation hung in the air. The girl staggered weakly. With a final push, Philip sent Brandon tumbling into the coffin. Then, using all of his strength, he slammed the lid shut. Pandemonium broke out. Women screamed as police sirens blared through the confusion, followed by officers storming in through the church doors. The scene transformed in moments. Brandon was dragged from the coffin, cursing angrily. Paramedics tended to the girl with concern. Philip stood amidst the chaos, feeling a mix of relief and horror wash over him. Questions flew at him. He answered as best he could. He portrayed Brandon as unstable, claiming this was his final cruel act against their grieving family. The girl's coherent words supported this, and there was damning physical evidence too. Discarded ropes nearby and Brandon's fingerprints on the inside of the coffin lid. But the full extent of Brandon's betrayal wasn't revealed in the church. Hours later, at the police station, a serious-faced detective unfolded a story of greed and twisted ambitions. Brandon was drowning in debt. He had plotted to ruin Philip, aiming to inherit the family business and solve his financial problems, especially now that his brother was gone. The girl, it turned out, was a witness to his shady dealings. She used to be his assistant and was about to be silenced in the most horrifying way imaginable. The revelation left Philip reeling. It wasn't only the betrayal, it was the chilling realization that he'd never truly known his own grandson's depravity. As Brandon was taken away in handcuffs, Philip felt that any sense of victory was empty compared to the losses he endured. His last living grandson was gone. Maybe he had been lost all along. The family he cherished was now irreparably broken. Time might lessen the pain, but it could never fully mend the wounds. All for money and greed, Philip thought bitterly. What a waste! What a terrible shock!